Welcome to DIY DEI. I am your host, Tawana Streeter, and today we are talking imposter syndrome. In the studio with me is Donata Andrews, Vice President of Inquest Consulting. Hey, girl.
Hey, Tawana.
So let's talk about this imposter syndrome, girl.
Something I know a lot about.
You know what? I think y'all know by now, the both of us, we are very, very transparent.
Yes.
And some of the stuff that we are talking about today, or will be talking about, it's not going to be a surprise, but it's going to be raw.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to be as vulnerable as I can because this is a topic that hits very close to home for me.
Same.
So let's start off with talking about what is imposter syndrome. And
Yes.
Imposter syndrome is the belief or the internal experience that you are not as good as others perceive you to be. Despite your high achievements, your multiple accolades, your degree of expertise, you just feel like you're phony, you're a fraud.
Yes.
And in fact, more than 70% of people will experience this at some point of their lives and careers.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about the signs of imposter syndrome.
Yes. For me, I'm going to speak from personal experience.
We're going to talk about personal experience.
I felt alone.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like, okay, it's just me. And I say this because in many work cultures, I'm one of only Black people, one of only Black women in leadership.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So one of, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I felt alone. There was not diverse representation where I could see myself in those organizations. And so I felt really alone. I felt like I needed to fit in. I was not being my authentic self. I would wear wigs instead of my natural hair. I've been natural, since the early 2000s.
Wow. So instead of feeling like you were acting as an imposter, you also felt like you were showing up as an imposter.
Yeah,
like your physical presence. Wow.
I was not being my authentic self. I felt like I had to fit in. I had to look a certain way in order to fit in. And in another situation, it pulls on my heartstrings a little bit just to think about that time period where I started shrinking. I did not want to bring attention to myself. So I just stayed in my little bubble, did the minimum. I won't even say the minimum because I have a high expectation, actually. I'm not a perfectionist, but I'm dang on near close. And I know you're going to talk about the 5 types soon. But I found myself shrinking. I didn't want to bring attention to myself.
Right.
So I just retreated.
Wow.
Yeah.
So for me, I was fearful of making mistakes.
Oh, yes.
And any success that I had achieved, I attributed it to someone else.
Bingo. Yes.
It wasn't because I did it all on my own. It was because of it wasn't because it was my skill. It was because I had this person behind me or this person sponsoring me or talking me up. That was why I was able to get as far as I did.
And you start believing some of the things that you've heard, whether people are intentionally trying to be biased, but you hear things like, you're so intelligent, as opposed to...
And that's a microaggression.
It is a microaggression. So do you say that to other people?
Or just Black women?
Or just me,
or just
as
me.
A woman of color.
Right.
And so you start internalizing some of that and feeling like, did I get this opportunity because I'm Black?
Right.
Is it tokenism? Or did I get this opportunity because of my own merit? You start to second guess and question when you achieve.
I had when I I started working at one of my past organizations, I had a colleague come to me and say, I can't believe they hired you, meaning a Black girl.
Wow.
And she was a Black woman. Mm-hmm. And there were a couple other Black women that worked in the department. And I was taken aback. I said, I don't see why not. My resume spoke for itself. In fact, as we were walking over to interview with the hiring manager, the recruiter was trying to, and make sure you talk about this, make sure you talk about that, make sure you talk about this. I didn't have to say any of those things because it was already on my resume. My resume spoke for itself.
Yeah, but for that coworker, it may have been, in their experience, they didn't see anybody who looked like them in those positions.
In those positions.
Yeah.
True. Yeah. I was a little offended, like, oh my God. Do you know who I am?
Please, no. I'm not saying what you experienced was invalid.
I didn't even consider that, even though I often talk about I'm the only one in that space. But I would never, as a Black woman, say I'm surprised that they hired you. Because as a Black woman, I know what we can achieve. I know what we have achieved. Mm-hmm. I would say I'm happy they hired you.
Yeah. And it we don't know for sure what that person's intent was, but the impact that it had on you was, so you're saying I'm less than?
I'm not good enough?
Or
I'm not worthy?
Curiosity? I'm different because they did hire me. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So.
And that's something that we women of color, we already have to fight those things. We have to fight. Yeah. We're constantly told by society and within our own culture that we are not worthy.
Yeah. I mean, look at the pay gap. I mean,
Absolutely.
We make 40% less than white men who do the same jobs that we do.
We make less than our white female counterparts and Asian counterparts. So we are constantly told we are not worthy. So I think it was just the fact that it was another woman of color saying that to me.
Yeah.
Knowing that, come on, sister.
Right.
We fight the same battle.
Right. You're looking for that allyship.
Right. Not validation, but that allyship.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So we kind of touched upon it. There are so many, there's this intersection of challenge of racism and sexism that makes women of color even more susceptible to imposter syndrome. And we were talking about that before that, when they're doing these studies, in any studies, not just about imposter syndrome, when they're talking about race, they're talking about Black men. When they're talking about women, or when they're doing studies on women,
oftentimes,
it's white or Asian women. We are so often left out.
Yeah. In fact, the imposter syndrome, the term was coined in 1978 from a study. Black women were not included in that study.
Right. Yet we feel it. Or we say we feel it.
We say we feel it because there are some who have counter views against imposter syndrome and said, stop saying that.
Right.
Stop saying that, especially for women in color. Stop saying we have imposter syndrome. One, we weren't included in the study.
Right.
And two, it's really exclusion and bias in the workplace that makes us feel that way. So there are some who say this doesn't apply to us.
Right.
Yeah. But, everyone's entitled to their opinion.
Right.
But I have experienced imposter syndrome.
Same.
I certainly have. I think as a Black woman, it is compounded by the things, your lived experience, things you've experienced in the workplace. And just that, I don't know if it's a cultural thing, but I've got to be 10 times better than the next person.
Right.
I've got to prove myself in the workplace.
Black women, certain spaces don't include Black women. They're not supposed to be in banking. You're not supposed to be in, finance, or you're just supposed to be a teacher. You're not supposed to be in STEM education.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, especially if you're looking for a leadership position. I actually saw a couple of, it's been interesting. My LinkedIn feed has been really interesting lately. I've seen a lot of folks talking about imposter syndrome. And overwhelmingly, it's been women of color, particularly Black women, who've been talking about imposter syndrome and them feeling like they didn't belong in the spaces they're in those industries they've been in, like finance. You mentioned that. And I know we're going to talk about this maybe at a later date, but I was just looking at statistics. 1 in 20 Black women are in the C-suite. 1 in 20 of the leaders in organizations are Black women.
And mind you, that number increased in 2021 only because of the racial issues that were going on in 2020. And people started really focusing on DEI.
But of all the DEI positions, 70% of those positions are held by people who are not people of color.
And are we surprised?
Right. And recently, DEI positions in the last year, because there has been, DEI became trendy. Let's just call it what it is.
Yeah,
it became trendy.
I was going to say sexy.
Yeah. It became trendy in 2020. Well, now that people feel like we're facing a recession and that our economy is in trouble, they started slashing DEI positions. And I say you put your money where your mouth is. You put your money where you put your money in what you value.
Right.
And so many organizations are starting to, not many, some, I want to be
careful.
To
pull back.
Some organizations are starting to pull back, not put money into DEI, and they've eliminated those DEI positions, those positions who are largely held by people of color.
And we talked about this before. If it's a part of your culture, it's not a position you will eliminate. It's not something that would be slashed because it's a part of your culture. And you mentioned that you often felt that, well, we both have said this multiple times, that we are often the only ones in the room. And in terms of the C-suite, 45% of women are often the only person of their gender in corporate rooms. And this number is even higher in STEM. And I was having this conversation, I forgot who it was with, but we were talking about all of the, like when you go through TSA and we were talking about how Black women or people of color are often always stopped and they have to check. And, this person was like, I was talking to my workout partner. When I had longer hair and I was wearing it curly, did they ever search your hair? Absolutely.
Oh, my hair gets searcred every time.
All the time.
If I have it in a bun,
Yeah. And she was saying how, non-Black women, the considerations are taken when they have bobby pins in their hair, when their hair is up. They don't often get searched, but my hair was just curly. I'm getting searched. I'm getting all, turn around and all. It always goes off. Always. Now I got pre-check, so let's see how that works. But when you talk about the advancements in STEM, it's really never people of color, like our melanin, is never considered. It's never taken into consideration when they are doing these different technology advancements. And that is the reason why we need to have more people of color in STEM, because they think about those things.
Yeah, for sure.
And I had another guest a couple weeks ago who said that during COVID, I guess the testing or whatever, it wasn't our skin color. It just was reacting differently because it wasn't taken into consideration.
That's very interesting.
But that's a lot of stuff.
Yeah. You have to have diverse representation in your organizations, in those think tanks, in decision-making bodies. Those things are important.
Right.
And it will help for people who do feel like they're imposters in the workplace. If you have that diverse representation, you can have somebody who says, maybe we should do, we should look at our recruiting, hiring, promotion practices to make sure that we
are being inclusive.
We are being inclusive.
And I often say, why aren't your junior employees performing the way that you think they should be performing in order to receive those promotions?
Yeah. Yeah.
You need to look at that.
Yeah. And just to make the connection, if you feel like you're the only one, you don't see anybody who looks like you, and you're feeling like an imposter, having those things in place, looking at your pipeline, how you bring people in and move them through is going to be important. Having leadership development programs that make sure that you have a good representation of all the folks within your organization in those leadership development programs. Make sure they have access to move from middle management or just to move into middle management sometimes, right, into other places, or just to have opportunities they would not otherwise have.
Tune in this Friday at 7 p.m. on CAN TV 19 as I discuss becoming a foster parent.
Family comes in so many different forms and can happen all throughout the life course. We just have to be open and accepting of however it shows up.
And when we talk about having those those leadership development trainings and stuff like that, please, please, please talk about giving feedback. I think I've gotten very good at receiving constructive criticism. And if you heard the conversation I had with Corliss, and she said that she thinks that white women or non-Black women probably operate in fear of giving that feedback to Black women because they don't want to be perceived as something else. I can see that, but you are doing a disservice to that person. And we also have to, I think I am very self-aware and I do a lot of self-reflection, no matter what. I do a lot of self-reflection. Okay, yeah, you could have done that better.
Yeah. Debriefs are important. And that's something at Inquest, that's part of our culture, our environment, is we do a debrief internally with our staff after a meeting and with our client partners. Because sometimes I've left a meeting, I'm like, oh, I did terrible. I was supposed to say X, Y, Z, and I didn't say that. And I forgot to mention
I missed this stat.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then you do a debrief and somebody's like, you were great.
Right.
You mentioned this and you mentioned this. And I love how, you did this. We do what worked well. What would you do differently in our debriefs? And when you get that feedback, it is confirmation. Okay, wait a minute. I did better than I thought.
Right.
It really helps to get over that doubt.
Right.
And that fear that you aren't being the person who you know yourself to be.
Right. Which is another sign of imposter syndrome, sabotaging yourself.
Yeah.
When you... I think we are both so hard on ourselves because we have high expectations.
For sure.
And that definitely, that shows in I hate performance appraisals. I hate them. And one of the reasons I hate appraising myself is I hate talking about myself in that way. Like, oh, I just hate that. I feel uncomfortable. And my boss is like, you are the worst critic of yourself. You're so hard on yourself. I will say I'm not even meeting the requirement. Her review is exceeding.
Yeah, absolutely.
And she's like, what?
Imposter syndrome.
But I am not comfortable. I can talk about what I do. I can like I said, my resume speaks for itself. When the data speaks for itself, the numbers, I can speak to that in terms of what I do, but it's hard for me to say, oh, and I've done this and I've done that and I've done this and I feel like I've done my job. Mm-hmm. That's what I was hired to do. It was nothing special.
What have you done in the past to remedy that? And or if nothing, what do you
I think what I do is I speak to the numbers. I try to bring in the data. Or I think one of my strengths is I can create funding strategies. I'm really good at that. I can look at a relationship, a partnership, and I can be like, okay, I'm looking at the data. In 2019, they were giving this, and we have all of these great things going on. We need to focus on this to move the needle on that. Mm-hmm. I'm great at pulling together strategies and including the data. So I will always focus on data as I talk about myself.
Have you ever just paused and just wrote down your accomplishments?
No. Well, I guess when I have to do, kind of, sort of. Like it's on my resume, raised X amount of money. But again, I look at that's data.
It is
I'm
data.
Not lying.
Right. It is data, but sometimes we just have to pause and write down.
Like I'm a damn good fundraiser because I done brought these new relationships in and I done built these bridges and
we have to remind ourselves of our greatness.
I know.
We have to remind ourselves of our greatness. We have to be, just as much as we are our greatest critic, we have to be our greatest advocate.
Yeah. I think a reason for that is because a few years ago, I had a huge failure. Mm-hmm. I was put in a position to succeed my former boss. And I was sitting there thinking like, I'm not ready. I'm not ready for this. I don't think I'm ready for this. Mm-hmm. I'm just I think I was a director, maybe assistant. I don't know. But I'm like, I'm not ready to be nobody's vice president. And the CEO and my boss was like, yes, you are. The CEO is going to develop you. She's going to be right there supporting you. It's going to be fine. You know this. Mm-hmm. You've been my number 2. You know this. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, yeah, but I prefer to just put it all on paper. You implement it. You do it. Mm-hmm. And he was like, no, it's time for you to step into that spotlight. And then shortly thereafter, the CEO left. Mm-hmm. And I was left by myself. And even though I felt, okay, you know this, I'm giving direction, I'm giving recommendations. And because the other person also had an agenda, because I'm permanent, this person is interim, that person is trying to get the job. Mm-hmm. So we can't shortstop. And in fundraising, when there's leadership changes, people are going to step back. So you're going to have a drop in revenue. Yep. Unfortunately, it's just inevitable. And no matter how many times I was like, we need to take that into consideration, she was like, no, that's not an option. Mm-hmm. And when it happened, being vulnerable, I was demoted. Mm-hmm. And it was
you didn't have a support system.
I didn't have a support system. And these are people that looked like me, toxic work culture. Yeah. These are people that looked like me that made me feel isolated. I was alone. They would be in the boardroom kikiing, having afternoon, happy hour. I was not invited. I'm part of the C-suite.
Again, your lived experience. Mm-hmm. Now you feel like an imposter. When you went to your next job, I hate to call it a job. I shrunk myself. But you retreated. Yep. You didn't feel worthy. So you showed up at this next job and you had to unlearn a whole lot.
A whole lot.
Before you can move forward. Right. And I can say that because I know you and we're friends and we've talked through this before. But you had to build yourself back up. Yeah. And the difference is when you went to your new job, you had a support system. I had the support system.
Not only that, I had the self-awareness to know I need to walk in there saying, this is what I need. This is what I require. I require someone who's going to support me, to be a thought partner, to be an advocate. And sometimes to push me when I don't want to be pushed. I honestly wanted to go in there and just hold my head down and just do the work and slide under the radar. Yeah. That's what I wanted to do.
Something interesting you said when you said you had a failure. And it's so interesting that we think if we fail, we can't get back up. Mm-hmm. And that is so not the case. People are resilient.
Yeah.
Black people are resilient. Yeah. Black women are resilient.
And I'm one of those people.
And we forget that.
Yeah.
A failure is not the end.
Yeah.
That's the beginning.
It's an opportunity.
It's a restart.
So in the last few minutes, let's talk about the types of imposter syndrome.
Okay.
We have the perfectionist, the person who it just has to be 150% before they send it off. It has to be absolutely perfect. Even though it was perfect, you still sit there saying it could have been better. Mm-hmm. You have the expert who feels like they are an imposter because they don't know something. They're not a...
I say it all the time.
They haven't mastered every step of the process. Mm-hmm. Then we have the natural genius who are just great, naturally great at everything. And then they have a mistake and it's like chaos. Yep. Then we have the soloist who feel like they are an imposter because they have to ask for help or they've achieved something because of someone else. And then you have the super person who just got to do everything. They're the hardest worker. They have to do everything themselves. They don't ask for help. And they have to reach the highest levels possible. And I think we all, at some point within our career, we are any one of these, and sometimes multiple.
Yes.
As a perfectionist, I've had to learn to bless and release. And then after that first review, come back to it and be like, I got it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I identify as expert and superhero.
Yeah, you are.
I oftentimes say in meetings, I'm not an expert in this area, but I know this. And everybody says, they're like, but no, you are. You keep saying, why do you keep saying that you are? So it's something I'm working on.
Yeah. And
the superhero, because I was in operations for 15 years. So I did all the things in nonprofit and in small businesses. And so I feel like when I'm not in the know and I don't know all the things, I failed. How did I not know that? I'm learning to navigate through that.
Yeah. So we overcome imposter syndrome. And you said one thing perfectly. Do you list all of your accomplishments? Create a brag book. Yes. I will probably never create a brag book.
You should. Even if it's just for you. Even if it's just for you.
But I need to brag on me.
Yes.
I'm going to work on that. Practice positive self-talk or affirmations.
Yes.
Own your accomplishments.
Own them. They're yours.
Accept that it's okay to make mistakes. And finally, seek out support and resources.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I got a great resource right here. When I'm acting crazy and in my head, I call my good girlfriend and she will get me together. That is all for today. Thank you for joining me on DIY DEI. Until next time, I am your host, Tawana Streeter. Have a good one.